Compañeros, welcome to another edition of the Data Partners podcast. I am Carlos El Chacon, your host, and this is episode 261. I am joined today by Mr. Kevin Fiesel.
Hello.
And Mr. Eugene Meininger.
Howdy, howdy.
And Eugene was kind enough to bring a friend along today.
Yeah.
So Eugene, can you introduce Luke?
Yeah,
Moloney,
no, I'd be happy to.
For today.
It's kind of funny. Luke was like this little life raft as I'm bumbling in the whole like Azure Synapse Analytics kind of piece. So he's a senior program manager at Microsoft. And one of my goals for 2023, because I'm a bit of a masochist, is learn Azure Synapse and all of its various pieces. And I usually work with small, medium businesses, so I'm not dealing with a terabyte of data, right? And so I'm learning all this stuff from scratch, and it's difficult. I even wrote a blog post about how I'm struggling with it. And I put Luke's session from the Data Toboggan virtual conference into my newsletter because it was just blunt and straightforward. It was like, here's Data Lake, here's when you should use it, here's when you shouldn't, and like here's times that this stuff isn't working the way that you want. Like you can pull the data into Power BI, but it's not always going to be the exact experience that you want. And so I reached out and said, hey, would you be up for talking to us about this? Because I think it's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, and so with that, Luke, welcome to the program. Right. So as a senior program manager at Microsoft, he is focused on, ironically, Azure Synapse Analytics.
yeah, exactly. Look, thanks so much for having me. I'm pleased that I could pull you out of the hole. I'm not sure though whether I've also enabled that pain as well. You know. So.
Sure.
Yeah, so you're in Ireland at the moment. So thanks for burning some midnight oil to be with us. And yeah, so we appreciate that. Okay, so then before we kind of jump into that, so the Data Lakehouse, right, is the title of the topic for today's episode. The show notes for today's episode will be at singledatapartners.com/lakehouse or at singledatapartners.com/261. Before we jump in right to the conversation, we do have a couple of shout outs I want to give. And I want to shout out to Nick Allen, Lynn Lee, Angie Hollis Martindale, Jennifer Oliver, Tyson Miller, Ken Jordan, David Harris, Andy Fulgham, Jerry Hoyt, Gary Lavadier, Audrey Polk, Julio Govrel, Deborah Cassidy, Rod DeBoer, Claire Mora, Rich Duke, Joseph Allison, Palapidi, Calip Dev, Caltilan, Capadilla, Rafael Placido, M, I guess not to be confused with Placido Domingo, Rasik Kodadia, Paul Blacker, Chris Malpass, Jennifer Justice, Matthew Nowitzki, Andrew Notarian, Tony Cortinas, Adrian Miranda Cordero, Bob Erickson, Brian Ogden, Kangu Botanus, Mohammedan Amrani, Radley Favia, Mariano Covo, Ratatouille Umale, Dan Johnson, Zoralu Islam, and finally Hansu. So there you go. Thank you.
By the way, hey JJ.
I have to imagine at this point people are submitting their names just to hear you butcher them. Like there's no other, like Occam's razor.
It's a tried and true tradition, right? To be in the very elite club of names that I cannot pronounce, right? It's a special honor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so thank you for reaching out, shouting out on the podcast or on social media in some way, and so yeah, hit us up on social media and we'll add you to a shout out in a future episode. Okay, so Luke. So, right, Eugene already mentioned he's trying to learn, right? We want to step out right at the 30,000-foot view, the data lake, and I guess, so this word has been around for a little while. I guess we are kind of focusing on the Synapse space.
Yep.
So maybe just take us through a couple of minutes. Let's make sure we at least understand some of the vocabulary and the lay of the land as it comes to, particularly, right, we're all Microsoft here, right? But the Microsoft landscape of this, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess there's two key concepts, right? So first of all, there's Azure Synapse Analytics. That's our analytics platform that's comprised of multiple different components. So you've got things like Synapse pipelines. So very much the same services that sit within Azure Data Factory. So the ability to move data from place to place, very much doing that extraction and load, copying data from place to place. We've also got mapping data flows or Synapse data flows as part of that. So that's that low code, no code environment. I don't want to write Spark myself. I'm not comfortable potentially with Python. I'm not comfortable with Spark SQL or something like that. I can just use a low code, no code environment. And then what it's actually going to do is it's going to manipulate that data within Spark. So they're the first two elements that we have within Azure Synapse Analytics. We've then got Synapse SQL Serverless. So this is the idea that you don't have data internal to a database or anything like that. You don't have data sitting in like an MDF file or the sort of equivalent if you're coming from a SQL Server world. Right. And you can just directly explore that data over the lake using SQL. So that could be CSV, that could be JSON, that could be Parquet, that can be Delta. So that's sort of the first three main services we've got. Then we've also got SQL dedicated pools. So this is a little bit more similar to what some people are probably used to with SQL Server, right? You've got SQL Server where you've got data that's internal to a table, so it's kind of sitting on an MDF file somewhere. But what you've actually got is 60 of them, and that allows you to have huge parallelism. But I mean, if you thought managing one SQL Server was a headache, suddenly you've got 60 of them. Right. So it's great for large scale and amazing at multi-terabyte workloads. But for the average punter, they're not running data warehouses with 10 plus terabytes worth of data, and obviously that that has a cost impact as well. Sure. And then finally, we've got Synapse Spark. So taking on the open source Apache Spark, we add some magic, but we also just fully manage that within the Synapse environment. And then finally, we've got Synapse Data Explorer, which is the sort of Azure Data Explorer, very much built for that sort of real-time data, time series data, semi-structured data. And underpinning all of those services is sort of rich integration with Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, and a nice sort of UI to wrap that around, but also provide some sort of common CI/CD experiences between them. So that's sort of like what Azure Synapse Analytics is in a nutshell. And then I think the second part of that is what's the Lakehouse? So we've had data lakes for a while, big object stores that you can do all sorts of stuff with. But we still want a lot of the advantages that a data warehouse gives us in terms of that manageability. And we're ultimately going to probably end up with something that approaches a dimensional, star schema, because we're probably consuming that data into something like Power BI or Tableau or pick your poison there. And so a lakehouse is really just an architectural pattern. Databricks largely probably invented it, depending on who you talk to. I don't want to get involved in matters of belief rather than fact. But it's about taking that data through a structured process to get that from your source systems, whatever they may be. So whether they're SQL Server on-prem, whether they're Azure SQL, whether they're SQL in AWS, or they might also be non-SQL sources. Or semi-structured sources or completely unstructured sources, and taking that through a sort of a process. And generally, that lakehouse approach is built around like bronze, silver, gold, the medallion architecture. I have personal views that mean that I prefer not to talk about it as the medallion architecture. So raw, cleansed, curated. But I have lots of finicky things that just don't sit well with me. So, but sometimes you got to accept you're in the minority.
No, we want to know the Lakehouse rules according to Luke, right? And that seems like a good philosophy. So then jumping in here, right? And just the sheer, I'm like, hey, give us the highlights, right? And just the sheer, going down the hit list, that's quite the hit list, right? And perhaps, right, let me get Eugene in here, and you're like, hey, I want to learn this new thing. And then you're like, what? Wait a second.
It's funny. So the blog post I wrote, right? I compared Power BI to 3 raccoons in a trench coat. And I compared, because it has DAX, M, and visuals. And I compared Synapse to like 10 raccoons in a trench coat. And I have made recently a valid business expense of 3 Animal Crossing raccoons in a children's trench coat. And I think when you just look at it from a tool perspective, it can be overwhelming, right? Especially because, like you kind of mentioned, Luke, you've got these competing tools sometimes, right? And from the outside, like if we're coming from a SQL Server, like DBA kind of perspective, because that's sort of the original audience of the podcast. And then Carlos brought me in and he's like, oh, I guess we'll talk about Power BI. But a lot of audiences is like DBAs and stuff. And again, coming from the outside, you start talking about Lakehouse and it's like, well, it feels like we took 3 like left turns to make a right. You know what I mean? Because we've been doing the whole OLTP to data warehouse things for decades, longer than I've been alive, probably to some degree or another. And it seems to me, though, as I've been trying to like dig into this, a lot of it makes more sense whenever you can understand the benefits of having a data lake, right? Even if you're at more medium scale kind of stuff, from talking to people, it seems like not only is there the scalability benefits if you do need the like 60 servers or you have a terabyte of data, but then also just whenever you have all these flat files as your base layer, your ingestion layer or whatever, then this is going to sound like a weird analogy, but it reminds me of like clearinghouses for checks, right? Where like if every bank had to talk to every bank that they got a check from, that's an n times n problem. And so you need something in the middle to decouple that. And so it seems to me, again, as an outsider trying to understand this, one of the big benefits with Data Lake is it gives you that decoupling for the tools that you're using. So like, can you talk a little bit about some of the benefits you see of Data Lake, why we would reinvent the entire wheel to get back to something we've been doing for 30 years?
So I think that is a huge part of it, right? So if you've got your silver data, for example, in Delta format, so Delta is an open format, most tools can talk to that. So if you've got a developer that comes in and wants to use a particular tool, they can do that. They don't have to, they're not going to ever create problems for or they're not going to create too many problems for your downstream processes. So the idea that you've got like somebody on you've got a traditional SQL Server oriented warehouse, and then you've just got somebody who decides to throw a horrible query at it because they're just extracting a little bit of data to potentially run some experimentation. That sort of goes away. It also makes that data access a lot easier. And I mean, frankly, the other part of the Lakehouse is particularly for small, well, actually, most customers who would fully adopt the Lakehouse, they generally see operational cost savings, because the problem with it is if you've got a SQL server, for example, and you've got you know that you're going to need 16 cores most of the time, you're paying for those 16 cores all of the time. So it's just the sort of promise of serverless cloud technology for the most part is going to probably result in you getting a whole heap of compute when you need it, being able to run that. I'm sure we've all built like horrible queries that have got like, some sort of rolling 23-week average combined, but you also remove like every Friday that's like the last Friday of every month or something, and you got to rebuild it all the time. You kind of can just run that query, use a ton of as much compute as you need to do that process, and then you kind of move on. So that flexibility and the cost advantages, I think, generally drive customers towards it. But I mean, you are correct, right? What you said is the problem is then you've got a lot of flexibility. The problem with if you go I kind of sometimes like to go to a restaurant with like 3 options on the menu, because at least they A should do all 3 well. Right. And you're like not given a whole heap of choice. But the problem with the flexibility is you're like, oh, I can go this way, I can go that way, I can go this way. And as Microsoft, our documentation is always like, here are the 30 ways to do it. In fact, why don't you do all of them? which is not realistic at all.
I feel like I'm like one of 5 people on earth that gets overwhelmed at Subways. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you just want to go to Jimmy John's and be like, give me a number 3 and not have to think about it, right? No, that makes sense.
Now, I would like to dive in there just for a second, right? So operational efficiencies you mentioned, right? But then, so we're also talking about, again, I kind of come from the SMB mindset where at the end of the day, I'm going to be taking flat files, right? So in my world, a lot of times that's CSVs, right? Excel documents, right? And I want to start doing something with them. Who is needed? What kind of skills are needed to ultimately be able to effectively use the Lakehouse? Because I mean, now granted, I'm not trying to throw shade at any of my Excel, analysts or the finance folks, or whatever, because they can do some amazing things. I mean, I look at it and I'm like, I have no idea, right, how you did that. But getting them to be like, oh, hey, by the way, go build a star schema seems like a big step, right? So then, who then is taking that on, right? If it's
yeah, and I think this is one of the interesting things is that we've got like the sort of pro code experience. So if you're a data engineer, for whatever reason, you're an SMB who maybe has a data engineer, or alternatively, you bring someone in who can just build that out, get that all working. Then you've got that pro code experience. That's not very often in those sorts of scenarios. I would say if you've got someone who's got the like decent Power BI skills and has really learned about like Power Query, and that sort of idea of a little bit of ETL, you'd be able to get there. Certainly, if you're coming from the SSIS world, I think you can get there. Now there are rough edges, and I don't want to sugarcoat the fact that there are rough edges on the low code, no code. Let's call it the low code experience within Synapse at the moment. Sure. And that's something that we need to address, and we need to make that process easier. But I genuinely see situations where customers are coming from that sort of, a pretty good Power BI developer or somebody who knows their way around SSIS, and they're building out those skills. And there's a lot of resources and everything to get there, depending on how much you want to go down the low code experience as opposed to the sort of pro dev experience. So it is tough. And maybe also the Lakehouse isn't completely, if you're running everything off CSVs, things like Power BI data flows can sometimes get you there, depending on your sort of use case. They're not, they certainly have some challenges. I'm sure anybody who's used it can point out challenges. But the good part of it is those challenges are normally at the once you've sort of started to get this running and you're now pushing the limits of the scalability of the solution, usually at that point you've delivered enough business value to say, hang on a minute, let's start to invest in something maybe that's a little bit more serious.
Yeah, this is worthwhile, and I can see the value, right? Yeah, here's potentially a bigger check if you need it or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, that's the hope, but I think the current economic environment we find ourselves in means companies are making tough decisions as to like how much they want to invest in that. And I think some of the like data science for data science sake or data engineering for data engineering's sake, I think is taking a back step at the moment. Whereas maybe previously that was bigger. Hopefully these things will pass.
Sure.
I fully agree with that last point.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think data scientists were one of the highest quantity laid off, either at Google or some recent company. I forget what it was. So yeah, sure there's might have been some overhiring in that area, or at least some skepticism coming up. So go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah. Okay. So we have the services. We talked about some examples of of where to get started. Maybe perhaps so let's talk a little bit about that build out, right? So I'm organization that has the data, right? I don't yet have a data warehouse. I skipped that phase, or we didn't have it, right? They wasn't quite there. What's my experience going to look like in terms of what I need to get up and running?
Yeah, so I mean, if you start off with an Azure subscription, you get started with Synapse Analytics. Your first step is going to be copying your data into a raw zone or a landing zone, right? So taking that data from whatever source system it is, or grabbing those CSVs, bringing them in, and then starting to sort of go through. Okay, let's put that data into a cleanse zone where we're doing the standard things that we've always had to do, right? Making sure that data typing isn't ridiculous, making sure that we're getting rid of invalid rows. A sale that's dated in 2050 is probably an invalid row. Doing that sort of processes, and then moving forward to a gold dimensional layout. And we can like I'm a spirit of Kimball kind of guy. I'm not a like a devout Kimballist. I think I've just made up a word there, right? But I think, as long as you're getting it to something that represents a little bit of a star schema, a bit of dimensions and facts, then that's where you can be consuming it with whatever tool you want to do. And what I would always be recommending customers to be doing is, focusing on like little use cases. Get data right the way through that process. You're going to learn things, right? So you're going to learn things when you ingest data into your data lake for the first time into that raw zone. You're going to learn a little bit about how you cleanse data, how you curate it, how you move it through to that process. But also it allows you to sort of show some iterative deliverables, which I think is probably independent of the lakehouse, independent of what approach you take. That's like the number one killer of data projects, in my view, is you don't deliver anything and you hope that 18 months time, maybe it'll all come together like, 3 bridges trying to meet perfectly in a center type thing. So
yeah, the classic data warehouse project from 20 years ago, right? Which is like why I think the move from multi-dimensional to tabular with like SAS and then Power BI was such a big deal, because at least my understanding, multi-dimensional was before my time, but it really felt like those types of projects were all right, we need 18 months and $500,000, right? Whereas with a lot of stuff like say tabular, a lot more of, okay, we're gonna get some sort of functional mini data mart thing just up and running. We're just gonna pull in the tables, get some joins going, and we'll figure it out. I guess one question I would have about the like trying to focus on these vertical slices and delivering value is, how hard is it to re-architect your bronze layer as you develop these lessons? Because my understanding is a lot of times you want to figure out what your zones are, especially because since it's an object store at the end of the day that uses folders, or what the cool kids called hierarchical namespaces, but it uses folders to manage some of the like pruning of your queries and all that kind of stuff. That means you need at least a little bit of thought of what your folder structure is, because if you want to filter per year, you want to make sure year is in a prominent spot. So how hard is it to say, if you've made say like 1 or 2 vertical slices, you've learned some lessons, to go back and clean up that bronze layer of how you organize your data?
You mean you don't just save everything on the desktop, right? Folder?
No. We use the N drive, right? We use the like network share. That was my last job, right?
Well, it's the R drive for raw.
Yeah. It's an on-premises data lake. That's
sitting on a USB thumb drive. Hopefully it won't break. I mean, it's a really good question. So I think, like your raw zone is normally going to be partitioned based on like a date modified, right? So it's almost going to sort of certainly be something like system name, database name, schema name, table name, year equals 2023, month equals blah 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 blah. So like raw layers are normally pretty easy to partition, because you're optimizing to write that data in, and you should be trying to do that in some sort of like incremental way. So whether that's CDC, whether that's change tracking, whether you've got columns that manage all this, you got to figure out what makes the most sense. But the way you structure your sort of cleansed and curated layers will change, and you can call these things hierarchical namespace. You can call them folders. You can call them just like partitions. It doesn't really matter. What I would say to most people is you're probably going to screw up your partitioning strategy, right? So you're probably going to get it wrong. What you should just accept is that at some point you're going to repartition everything, and that process shouldn't be too bad to do, right? So it's going to be it's going to be an expensive one-time operation in terms of if your normal bill is, I don't know, let's say $1 a day, just because it's late and I'm going to do easy maths, right? maybe that day costs you $10, right? So
compañeros, you should take Luke's math and multiply by what?
1,000 maybe or something.
Yeah. Just to extrapolate, but we'll keep it easy.
And so you might like repartition that data, but that shouldn't be terribly difficult to do, right?
Okay.
So if you've built your processes relatively well, it's not super hard to do. You do have to figure out whether it's going to have any changes on your downstream systems. Like, if you've got Power BI doing incremental refresh, you got to figure that out. But I mean, frankly, like you'd probably have most of the time like Power BI doing incremental refresh on top of your fact table. How often do fact tables actually change partitioning strategies? Because like they normally have a fairly clear way to do that. It's normally some sort of date field. Dimensions become a little bit more interesting, but I mean, most dimensions, truthfully, you've got to do a full reload from Power BI because you can't incrementally generally figure that out terribly. Like you'd have to sort of manage those Power BI partitions. I like how I'm going to start talking about different types of partitions, but you've got to like manage those manually. And I think for most customers, they're not at that level where they're managing those partitions manually. Certainly there are many customers who are, but most customers don't get to that point because it's just not worth the overhead. And your dimension tables are normally not the ones that hurt the most. It's your fact tables that hurt properly.
Yeah, 100%. They're definitely much larger by design. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes. And also, this whole discussion actually gives a good reason why that raw layer is so important, because the premise here was, well, we have the raw layer. If you want to repartition everything in the refined layer or the curated layer, if you want to, or refined or cleansed, I'm going to use refined because that's how I roll. Yeah. But same common understanding. Let's now talk about Wittgenstein for a while. But you put this into those downstream layers. Well, because of the fact that you have that historical data, you have that collection of information, you don't have to try to figure out what it was downstream or upstream in your original sources, because your original sources probably don't have all of that information anymore. So your raw layer here becomes the historical repository of what things looked like at different points in time and allow you to rebuild downstream in your refined / cleansed, or in your curated layer, or even down and downstream users.
Yep. And I mean that extends to partitioning, but it also extends for like I remember vividly, I was like one of the first consulting engagements I ever did, and I was in this long argument about how we were going to manage slowly changing dimensions. I think of like employees, like employee names or whatever. So at what point would we give them a new surrogate key? Because like, is a certain position change actually mean that their position expired? Or, if they move from like junior to senior or whatever, did we care about that? And like, it was a long argument. And I think every single data professional has probably been in one of those boring discussions where you're like, I just need the logic. Like, I don't really care that much about how it's done. But one of the great things about the data lake design is that you've always got that data. So if you want to change the way you're managing your slowly changing dimensions for one of your dimension tables, so suddenly, previously you never cared about someone's address, but actually you decide to do fraud analytics, and therefore maybe you actually do want to know what their address is, and therefore you're going to have to rebuild your dimension. You can do that because you've got the history, and B, you can kind of spin up the necessary compute to do that in a relatively quick way, where you're not like, oh yeah, we're going to find a long weekend, we're going to rebuild one of our dimension tables, which I think is the situation that people have probably been in the past.
Yeah, that's a huge point worth emphasizing. First, though, the whole employee thing, like that's the canonical like example every book uses to explain like slowly changing dimensions, right? But like, Amanda, if you can edit in like a light bulb going over my head, please do, because we think about data warehouses as a solved problem, right? Mm-hmm. But if you were to tell me, oh, Eugene, we need to add data that we like a new column in our data warehouse that we do not have in there. Well, that ranges in difficulty from, okay, we'll add it and then just do an join and insert, cool, to, okay, we need to rebuild the whole dimension or whole fact table, to, we don't have that data because we weren't keeping it, and that happened 5 years ago, so put in a blank, you know what I mean? And
Yep.
That's something I hadn't considered of, okay, yes, it may feel like this data lake stuff is adding a ton of engineering effort, but then whenever you need to just pull in one column, you can do that without having to burn everything to the ground.
Yep. And one more little bit here. If there's ever a bug, you can go back to that original data. You can rebuild it. This is actually going back to Kimball style data warehousing. The whole, one of the main points of this was you can rebuild everything that you really in the Kimball style, you can't rebuild everything. It is not a source system. And that ends up being a pain, that if I don't have it in my source systems, I can't rebuild it. So the only way I could is if that source system contains the information. Here now we're saying, okay, this is similar to why Apache Kafka became so popular, is I have my stream of all of the events that have occurred over time. If my processing was wrong, I calculated incorrectly, I don't need to try to figure out what formulaic changes do I need to make in the downstream tables. I can just say, let's rerun this whole stream with the correct data and write it out. Same thing here with that data lake. I've got the raw data. My calculation was wrong. The data was not wrong. If the data is wrong, that's a different story. But my calculation was wrong. Let's write it again. I can overwrite what's already in my refined folder and just downstream it just works.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's a really it gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of freedom, because you don't have to be. I find in traditional warehousing you can very quickly end up having a lot of complexity that means that you can't make changes because you're worried that you might have to, what do we do? How might we reprocess this data if something goes wrong? Particularly if I've got weird source systems that are creating a little bit of funniness in the data. You almost end up with teams that are crippled by, it's almost like anxiety about releasing something that then they can't back away from very easily. And it then leads to just over engineering to the nth degree, and that gets interesting. So I do think though the question about keeping historical data is also is also interesting for the other reason, which is how long do you actually keep that historical data for, and at what point do you keep that for? And certainly something that I find, I guess, being in Europe, there's a lot of focus on do we actually need to be keeping that data? What does that mean for us? But generally so sometimes people say, well, there's a bit of a tension there. Am I keeping every piece of data until the end of time? Or alternatively, am I getting rid of data very quickly? But there's generally a balance, because, do you necessarily need personally identifiable data in a particular way, or do you get rid of that and you keep certain sales records or something like that, where you can actually be still getting the same business value from the data, but you don't actually need to know potentially that it was, Luke Moloney who ordered, I don't know, useless tech stuff that I do on Amazon from time to time.
or purchased, Animal Crossing plushies off the internet for a skit. Yeah.
However, that's a very important business purchase. I want to let the IRS know that.
Yeah. No. It's common and traditional in our field to buy children's trench coats. It's completely a normal expense.
Also, unmarked vans with no windows.
Oh gosh.
That escalated quickly. My goodness.
Wait, was I not supposed to tell him about your other purchase there, Eugene?
No.
Oh, whoops.
Okay, so we've kind of been taking this from a getting started perspective, right? What to do. Perhaps maybe let's crank it up. Other considerations. So let's just say so I'm thinking of a customer, right, for that actually has a warehouse that's I'm going to say half baked. Is not so it doesn't quite do everything that, well, actually that's not true. Let me back up. They have a data warehouse that at one time suited them just fine, but they now have kind of outgrown it, if you will, right? Like they need these other things now, like other things have happened in the business, and they're like, oh, we've got new lines or we've got new things that we want to take in that the current warehouse can't do. They don't have that person to build or to rebuild or to help, add on to that warehouse. Right? Maybe put your consulting hat on for a second, right? Yep. And if they came to you and said, hey, we want to add, let's just say, right? So something similar, but not quite the same, right? I have a new line. I have this new thing in my business that I want to start capturing. Is that a candidate to use this other technology, or do you go ahead and bite the bullet and kind of like, well, let's keep what we've got going and go find somebody to do that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, that's the $1 million question in my view. Not literally, but for a lot of maybe this is a controversial view that I have. I generally believe that the Lakehouse is a modernization story. If you're not prepared, some people will be like, oh, maybe you can bring some of your SQL stuff. Maybe you can bring some of your like old ETL packages or whatever into the new world. I mean, yes, you can do it, but it's kind of a pretty bad idea. And you are compounding technical debt at that point, right? Like in my view, it is the equivalent of like getting one of those credit card sign-off offers where they're like, you can transfer your balance interest-free for 12 months. But then, the post 12 months interest rate is, unbelievably high, right? So I basically do believe that the Lakehouse is a modernization journey. And if you're going to go on that journey, you have to be prepared to sort of break from what you've got in the past and build fresh. And I think that's really the only way that you get a lot of the actual benefits, particularly the cost benefits associated with the Lakehouse. So that might mean, you've got a period where you have to look at some sort of dual running, where you've still got, your historic data warehouse for certain use cases. You're building more of things. You're decommissioning parts of that warehouse, and that's where like delivering those vertical, horizontal use cases enables you to potentially, okay, we're gonna turn this part off of our historic data warehouse and run that in the lake. We're gonna turn this off. And you can kind of chunk it up, almost like a strangler pattern that you use for like modernizing monolithic applications. But I basically believe that you have to be prepared to invest in that. And I do also then think, I'm not sure whether this is a good thing to say, with some people who are part of consulting or do consulting work. But you have to have that internal expertise you have to have in-house expertise in a lot of this space, one way or another. Somebody who knows how to run it, knows how it works. Because otherwise, I think, and this is particularly true, I think, in data warehousing and across actually most parts of IT. If you just get in a consultancy that tries to do something to you, they often will try and like keep you on the hook for an ongoing. They want to keep that meter running, so to speak. So I think also companies have to, particularly, once you reach a certain size, take a bit of ownership to say, we're going to bring in outside expertise to augment, to provide us with additional capacity, to give us greater capabilities. But then we've got to be able to own it. We've got to be able to maintain it, and we've got to invest in it. Otherwise, all code bases that people don't invest in, that don't know. And it doesn't matter whether it's the Lakehouse, whether it's warehousing, whether it's application development. If you're not continuing to work on that, people lose context, people lose understanding, and slowly the sort of design of the system and business needs kind of move apart, because business needs are often changing.
Right. So I agree with that. And we like the idea, right? So here's my waiver, right? My waiver answer, whatever my in the sense that part of what we have found helpful, and again, I'm not the Lakehouse person, right? There are other consultants that are helping me with that, but so a lot of times what can be helpful still is coming in and knowing somebody that at least has done the process before. So you're not kicking yourself and opening the book and you're like, how many services are I going to learn? And at least have some understanding there to get it up and running, to kind of show that initial value. And then once you're like, okay, yeah, I think I'm on the right path. Okay, then you can make the investment in your team to be like, okay, guys, obviously we've seen that. Now let's make sure that knowledge transfer or whatever, training, whatever that looks like, then begins to happen. So there can be a nice handoff potentially.
You want the person in the jungle with like the map and the machete that's going to at least help you get there. But I think you're right.
Yeah.
Like data warehouse projects in particular, even whenever like a consultant is doing their best, is prone to scope creep, right? And part of the reason stuff what you talked about, where it's really tempting to be like, oh, well, we need this column and this column and this column, and we got to get it perfect. So we need, again, 18 months and $500,000. And I can completely see a scenario where someone, maybe not even unscrupulous, but is charging by the hour, is suddenly not incentivized to be as efficient and get to value as quickly as possible, right? So it makes sense that you need to be able to have that handoff at some point. Otherwise, unless you're doing a flat rate, which puts more of the risk on the consultant, you're incentivizing them to gold plate it on a certain level. Yeah.
And I mean, it's not even, I don't even want to sound like I'm just trashing consultants. It's also organizations that
Sure.
do this. They're like, oh yeah, instead of doing 2 weeks of handover, let's do a little bit more scope. And instead what you'll do is you'll do a document that like handover documentation is always rubbish. I mean, I'll be the first to put my hand up to be like, I have written some bad handover documents because it was like, oh, we got to get this done real quick. So you're like, this stored procedure does stuff, don't touch it. Or you're like, this stored procedure takes a date, won't tell you what I do. Like you just have to rush through that process. So it's got to be it's got to be both parties kind of committing to this being an ongoing product where there's handover and there's skill sharing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, last thoughts on the Lakehouse?
I mean,
Oh, sorry.
You go.
Sorry,
No, you go.
No, I'm excited to learn more about this, right? Like again, coming in from the outside, it feels like Baskin Robbins 31 flavors of ice cream with all the tools, and it feels like we're reinventing the wheel. But one of the things I've learned over time is that there's generally a reason we're doing that. Like with Power BI and like data flows and data marts and all that stuff, felt like we're reinventing the wheel. But the reason Microsoft did that is so you could make a wheel that business users can intuitively use and work their way through. And so that meant a certain amount of pain, right? And I have to believe that we're not, it's not like somebody at Hadoop just bribed everyone a decade ago. Like I have to believe there's a reason that we're moving towards this type of data architecture. So I'm excited to learn more about it.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting place to be in. I think the other part of it is we're still fairly early on in this journey. Databricks in particular have done a lot of work to sort of further the architecture, further the story, further kind of where we want to go. I think as an industry, so I think props to them for doing that. But I also think there's this world where we need to make sure that whatever we do, the Power BI user is really welcome into this world. So there's I think it'll be really exciting a couple of years, and there's a ton of vendors over it. Sometimes it's about figuring out which ones are snake oil salespeople and which one are selling something for real. Because sometimes I feel like people are like, oh, my magical solution will solve all of your lakehouse problem. Like, here's a lakehouse, and I've just sold you a lakehouse. Have fun. The reality is that every business has its own data complexities that are hard to work through and require people to think through things and then actually deliver on what the business wants.
Right. Okay, awesome. Should we do SQL Family?
Sounds good.
So Luke, now we've been talking about non-SQL Server things.
Yeah.
And we didn't ask at the beginning, right? But your background, I guess, what's your first experience working with SQL Server?
My first experience with working with SQL Server was I was working for a healthcare company running some sort of stuff to do with like digital health in Australia. And I figured out that this application that we had a SQL Server backend. So I was like, all right, who do I have to go talk to get access to it? I'd done a SQL course in uni. It was like on an Oracle emulator that I hated with passion. It was like a command line interface. Anytime you had a group by, if you had any problem in the statement, didn't matter whether it related to the group by statement or whatever, it would always error on the group by. So I sort of knew a bit about SQL from there. And then I got into SQL Server. Just trying to hack around on this database because I was sick and tired of pulling things out into CSVs and then kind of trying to manually pull them all together, actually in Click at the time. So actually probably come more from the BI angle and then got into the data engineering.
Yeah, interesting. Very cool. What would you do if you had to change careers?
This is a good question, I think. So part of me, when life's a little bit stressful and I'm like, oh, why did we create silicon and why did we let computers do all this stuff? I'm like, maybe I'd be a dog walker. I think that would be great fun. Like I'm a dog person. I don't actually have one at the moment, but I'm a dog person. So I think either dog walker, or maybe I'd I think probably a dog walker actually.
There we go. Hey.
Yeah.
Get out, right? Get to be with other people's animals, and then give them back. And
yeah, exactly.
So after that stressful day, and you're thinking about, why Silicon Valley existed and all that stuff.
Yeah.
What's one thing that can instantly make your day better?
Look, I mean, if it's a Friday afternoon, that first beer is high marginal utility on that first beer. But yeah, otherwise I'd probably say like I like a little bit of music just to tune out the world and whatever. So I think that's, I don't know, depends on, or actually, what am I saying? The other thing is I'll just go play Xbox and play Battlefront 2. Like there's nothing like killing droids to make you feel better about life. So.
Yeah, what's that Will Smith movie when he didn't trust the aliens and what's the anyway? That's funny. So now, speaking of music, right?
Yeah.
So what's your go-to song when you need to boost your mood?
So there's a new Florence and the Machine album. And I think Florence and the Machine is a fantastic musician. She's got an incredible vocal range. Otherwise, on a plane, I listen to Flight Facilities. I don't know whether it's Australian sort of electronic band. Last year, I think I was in the top 0.1% or something, according to like Spotify. But that's because I go on a plane and all I listen to is the same album because it puts me perfectly to sleep. But I could be like, oh, look at how cool I am. Otherwise, unfortunately or fortunately, my father's music taste rubbed off on me a lot. So there's a fair bit of like Pink Floyd, Phil Collins, that sort of stuff in there. So yeah, it's a pretty eclectic music mix.
There we go. I was going to say that a couple of those, I'm going to have to go look those up. I'm not familiar with those bands, right? But my kids are always bringing me music. I'm like, who is this? I'm like, can't keep up anymore, right? Okay. So do you have a bucket list?
I don't.
Okay.
So I think one of the, I was thinking about some of the things that I would want to do. I don't know. So I want to go to, I love Formula One. So I want to go to many races, but I think in terms of something weird, that I particularly, want to do is I'd like to get on one of those, it's not like a bobsled. It's like like Huskies.
The dog
far
sled.
out.
Yeah, the dog sled.
Yeah, dog sled. I think that would be great fun.
Oh yeah, the Alaska race. They may have it other places, right? But there's the big one in Alaska. Starts with a K. Not Klondike. But
Adirondack?
Adirondack. There we go. Hey.
So I wasn't proposing doing a dog race. I just like generally think it'd be good fun to like, go like on a much more leisurely pace. Like I think I would die.
No, this is
on that,
legally
like-
binding. You've committed now. Sorry.
That's right. Here's your bucket list. That's number one.
Yeah.
Your tickets are booked. Right. The entry fee is $500.
I mean, I'm in Australia. Like I grew up in Brisbane, north of Sydney. The story is going somewhere. And like I get cold as soon as it falls below 25 degrees Celsius, which I think is like
About 76 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah. Like I'm a proper wuss when it comes to the cold. So the idea of doing like a dog sled race in the Alaskan winter, I think I would. It would not be pretty.
Not enough layers.
No.
Yeah, okay. Luke, our last question for you today. What's your favorite ice cream topping?
Look, I'm just partial to a very good pistachio ice cream.
Oh,
So not necessarily anything on top. You could put some pistachio on top if you really wanted to.
sure.
But like a really good pistachio ice cream, it would probably be my favorite ice cream.
And have you found said ice cream in Ireland?
I actually haven't. I haven't found a really good pistachio ice cream. But that's one of those things that I should try to do. I found many other I have fallen in love with the Guinness in Ireland. So I found other things to enjoy.
There you go. Well, awesome. Well, Luke, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. Appreciate the information, and for helping Eugene get on his way.
Mhm.
And so we'll have to bring you back right in a couple of months, whatever. And as things continue to progress with the lake house, you can give us an update and let us know about that pistachio ice cream, because we'll all be anxiously waiting to know the answer.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been great. Now, if folks want to get in contact with you, how can they do so?
So I'm at Luke Moloney, one word, on Twitter. So that's LUKEMOLONEY. Or I'm on LinkedIn. You can search Luke Moloney. Otherwise, they're probably the two best ways to get in touch with me. I mean to understand how to do this Mastodon thing, but I just haven't figured it out yet. I know that Twitter is a dumpster fire, and I need to fix that. Like I need to get off it. But anyway, that's
But it's our dumpster fire.
future problem. Yeah.
Right. The level required to get off, right? Is like, Okay. And Eugene.
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter and on YouTube at SQLGene.
Mr. Kevin.
All of my contact details are available somewhere in your data swamp. Good luck finding them.
Hopefully you've partitioned correctly, right? Because otherwise you'll probably have to
Probably
repartition.
Swamps are a big source of biodiversity. I want to be clear. They get a bad rap.
Also mattresses.
Compañeros, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I'm at Carlos L. Chacon. Thanks again for tuning in today. This has been episode 261. Thanks for being here. If you have a suggestion, or you want to come on, right? Maybe you're a PM, right? At Microsoft, or maybe you're just a listener and you've tried something new. You want to come talk. Let us know. We'd love to have you on. We'd love to have you on here, and we can chat about it. So thanks again, compañeros, and we'll see you on the SQL Trail. Bye now.
Bye.
It's
SQL Data Partners.